The alien overlords came without warning. One moment, Earth was at peace, and the next, the skies split open, revealing their massive ships hovering over the major cities of the world. Governments scrambled to communicate, military forces were mobilized, but it was already too late. The invasion wasn't a war. It was an annihilation. The overlords didn't bother with full-scale assaults. They didn't need to. Their soldiers were never seen. Instead, they deployed their most terrifying weapon, the shadow assassins. Nobody knew where they came from or how they moved, but wherever they appeared, death followed. World leaders were taken out in the dead of night, entire defense grids collapsed overnight, and the most secure bunkers were breached with ease. No alarms, no traces, just silence. The world was in shock. Within a week, Earth's defenses crumbled. Nations that had once boasted the most advanced technology and military might were left in ruin, unable to even comprehend the threat they were facing. The shadow assassins were like ghosts, slipping through every barrier, killing with precision, and leaving no survivors. Entire cities fell under their silent reign of terror. No warning, no mercy. As governments fell and humanity was brought to its knees, the overlords made their presence known. They transmitted a message to the entire planet, cold, calculated, and final. Earth now belonged to them, and resistance was futile. Panic spread across the globe like wildfire. People hid in fear, unsure of when or where the next attack would come. The world's leaders, the last remnants of organized resistance, convened in what little secrecy they had left. They couldn't outfight the aliens. Their weapons were useless, their technology outclassed. Every attempt to strike back ended in failure, as the shadow assassins systematically dismantled their plans. It seemed like the end of humanity was inevitable. But then, rumors began to spread. Quiet whispers, at first, about something, or someone, who was fighting back. Not in the open, not with guns or bombs, but in the shadows, just like the assassins. They called it the Creeper. No one knew if it was a person, a team, or something else entirely. But reports started trickling in from small resistance groups. The shadow assassins were being hunted. It started with isolated incidents. A squad of shadow assassins sent to eliminate a resistance cell never returned. Their bodies were found days later, mutilated, their technology in pieces. Then, a high-ranking alien commander was found dead in his ship, his guards slain without a single shot fired. The overlords were furious. Their perfect, invincible assassins were being picked off one by one. The Creeper didn't operate like a traditional soldier. There were no grand battles or heroic charges. Instead, it struck from the dark, using tactics even the shadow assassins couldn't predict. Wherever the aliens went, the Creeper was already there, lurking, waiting. It seemed to know their every move, their every plan. It was as if humanity's darkest nightmares had come to life, but for once, those nightmares were fighting for them. The overlords didn't understand it. How could the primitive humans, on the brink of extinction, produce something that could challenge their most feared warriors? They had underestimated the depths of human ingenuity, the lengths to which humanity would go when pushed to the edge. The Creeper wasn't a conventional hero. It didn't wear a uniform or lead an army. In fact, no one had ever seen it. It moved in whispers and rumors, leaving behind only destruction in its wake. But its message was clear: humanity wasn't finished yet. Word of the Creeper spread through the remaining pockets of resistance like a wildfire. For the first time since the invasion began, hope flickered. Small groups began to band together, encouraged by the reports that the alien assassins could be beaten. They started adopting the Creeper's tactics, using guerrilla warfare, traps, and ambushes to take down isolated alien forces. What little technology they had left was turned into tools of sabotage and disruption. The overlords responded with fury. They ramped up their assaults, sending more shadow assassins to hunt down the Creeper, but it only seemed to make things worse. The more they tried to crush it, the more elusive it became. And with every failure, the overlords' control over Earth began to slip. But even as hope grew, fear lingered. The Creeper's methods were brutal, ruthless. It didn't just kill the shadow assassins, it dismantled them, breaking them down in ways that unsettled even the resistance fighters who revered it. Some began to wonder if the Creeper was as much a danger to humanity as it was to the aliens. The war had changed. What started as a straightforward invasion had become a game of shadows, with the Creeper at its center. Humanity wasn't fighting for survival anymore, it was fighting to reclaim its world. But as the lines between hero and monster blurred, the question remained, what would be left of humanity when the Creeper was done? The Overlords, desperate to regain control, initiated more extreme measures. They unleashed new technologies, trying to corner and capture this mysterious enemy. But the Creeper adapted just as quickly, staying one step ahead, striking where the aliens least expected. It was no longer just a resistance, it had become a force of nature, a living, breathing symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender. The more the Overlords tried to understand the Creeper, the more they realized they couldn't. It was a product of desperation, a weapon born from the darkest parts of human survival instinct. And as they lost more of their precious assassins, the Overlords began to see the writing on the wall. Earth was no longer an easy conquest. They were up against something they couldn't predict, couldn't control. The invasion had taken a turn they had never expected. Earth had sent the Creeper, and now, it was the aliens who were afraid of the dark. The Creeper wasn't just a weapon, it was an idea born out of humanity's darkest hour. It was something more than technology, more than strategy. It was a product of necessity, crafted in secret as humanity's leaders watched the world fall apart. The Creeper wasn't made in a lab filled with scientists or soldiers. It was forged by the last remaining minds who understood that survival now depended not on strength but on fear itself. Years before the invasion, secret experiments had been conducted by a handful of researchers who feared that Earth's next great war wouldn't be between nations, but between worlds. They knew that conventional warfare would be useless against a superior enemy, so they sought something different, something that could strike at the heart of any invader, something psychological. This wasn't about brute force. It was about breaking the enemy's mind. They had studied ancient human history, learning how fear could control entire populations, how the unseen could be more terrifying than the strongest armies. From that, they developed the foundation for what would become the Creeper. It wasn't a soldier, not in the traditional sense. It didn't carry guns or bombs. It used the darkness, the unknown, and the primal terror all beings feel when they know something is out there, hunting them. When the invasion began and the Shadow Assassins unleashed their silent terror, the remnants of Earth's leadership knew they had to act. They activated the program, releasing the Creeper into the world. It wasn't a person, nor was it a machine. It was an amalgamation of the best and worst parts of humanity, our fear, our cunning, our ability to survive by any means necessary. The Creeper was designed to mirror the tactics of the Shadow Assassins but push them further, to become the thing that even the Overlords would fear. The first deployment of the Creeper was met with skepticism. Even those who knew of its existence weren't sure if it could work. It wasn't a single entity that could be easily tracked or controlled. It operated on its own, blending into the shadows, becoming a part of the environment. It didn't fight in the traditional sense, and that's what made it powerful. It understood that the mind was the real battlefield. When the Creeper first struck, no one knew what had happened. A team of Shadow Assassins had been sent to eliminate the last of Earth's major resistance forces, but they never returned. Their bodies were found days later, completely dismantled. Not just killed, but utterly destroyed, their technology rendered useless, their advanced weaponry torn apart. It wasn't a clean kill. It was a message. The Overlords were enraged. They couldn't comprehend how a species they had nearly eradicated could fight back. The Shadow Assassins were supposed to be invincible, their technology far beyond anything humans had ever seen. But now, something was hunting them, and the Overlords didn't know what it was. Reports began to flood in from various corners of the globe. Wherever the Shadow Assassins went, the Creeper followed. It seemed to know their every move, slipping past their defenses, striking when they least expected. It wasn't a direct confrontation. The Creeper didn't need to face them head-on. It used their own fear against them, turning their greatest strength into a crippling weakness. The assassins were methodical, cold, and calculated, but the Creeper exploited the one thing they couldn't control: their instinct for survival. No matter how advanced they were, no matter how perfect their training, the assassins were still beings with a will to live. The Creeper played on that fear, using psychological warfare to drive them to the edge. It knew how to make them doubt, how to make them second-guess their own abilities. In one particularly brutal strike, a high-ranking alien commander was found dead, his body twisted and contorted, surrounded by his elite guard, also killed in similarly grotesque ways. It wasn't just about the kill. The Creeper wanted them to understand that they weren't safe, not even in their strongest fortresses. No matter where they hid, no matter how much technology they surrounded themselves with, the Creeper could reach them. Panic began to set in among the alien forces. The shadow assassins, once feared as the perfect killing machines, began to falter. They started making mistakes. They would hesitate before entering a dark room, check behind them more often than before. Their flawless coordination began to crumble as paranoia crept in. The Overlords tried to increase their control, sending more and more resources to hunt down this new threat, but the Creeper was always one step ahead. Humanity, watching from the shadows, began to take heart. Resistance groups started to reform, inspired by the tales of the Creeper. They learned to mimic its tactics, using the environment to their advantage, striking from the dark. They didn't have the Creeper's abilities, but they didn't need to. All they needed was to believe that they could fight back, and that belief spread like wildfire. For the Overlords, this was unacceptable. They were supposed to have complete control over the battlefield, but now they were being outmaneuvered by a foe they couldn't even see. They deployed new technology, advanced scanners, and tracking devices designed to locate the Creeper, but it was useless. The Creeper wasn't something that could be tracked. It didn't leave a trail. It was a living nightmare, always just beyond their reach. As the war shifted in favor of humanity, the Creeper's reputation grew. It was no longer just a weapon, it had become a legend. Stories spread among the remaining resistance fighters about how the Creeper could walk through walls, how it could become invisible, how it was invincible. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the Overlords were losing their grip on the planet. But even as hope grew, the Creeper remained an enigma. No one knew who or what it truly was. Was it human? Was it something else entirely? Some began to wonder if the Creeper was as much a danger to humanity as it was to the invaders. It had no mercy, no compassion. It was a weapon of fear, and once the Overlords were defeated, would it simply turn on the humans who had created it? The Overlords, desperate to regain control, resorted to even more extreme measures. They launched massive assaults on human strongholds, hoping to draw out the Creeper. But each time, they were met with silence. The Creeper didn't play by their rules. It didn't respond to threats or ultimatums. It waited, lurking in the shadows, always watching, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the end, the Overlords realized they were no longer fighting humanity. They were fighting something far worse. They had come to Earth thinking they could conquer it with ease, but now, they were trapped in a war of shadows, a war they couldn't win. The Creeper had become the embodiment of humanity's will to survive, and as long as it lived, the Overlords would never be safe. The Creeper's presence had shifted the balance of power, but the Overlords were not about to give up their conquest so easily. Realizing that brute force wasn't enough, they adapted their strategy. The Creeper had introduced something into the conflict that the Overlords had never anticipated: fear. And now, they sought to turn that fear against humanity. In response to their growing losses, the Overlords began developing new countermeasures, specifically designed to neutralize the Creeper. They initiated mass surveillance programs, deploying advanced drones and scanning technology that could detect even the slightest disturbances in their environment. They experimented with cloaking shields and light-based traps, trying to outsmart their unseen foe. Every effort was focused on trapping the Creeper, but no matter how sophisticated their tools, they couldn't pin it down. The more the Overlords tried to control the situation, the more their assassins fell. The Creeper didn't just avoid detection, it thrived in the chaos their new technologies created. The Overlords had underestimated one critical aspect: the creeper wasn't following any predictable pattern. It wasn't just a machine, but something more adaptive, capable of evolving as quickly as the Overlords could plan. And this adaptability made the creeper the most dangerous element on the battlefield. Humanity, sensing the desperation of their alien oppressors, began to organize more strategic strikes. Coordinated efforts between resistance fighters and what remained of Earth's military forces started to yield results. Small victories turned into larger ones, and the Overlords found themselves stretched thinner with each passing day. The creeper had become their obsession, their focus, while the rest of humanity regrouped and retaliated. Yet the creeper's tactics were anything but straightforward. It didn't operate like any human military mind. Instead, it utilized guerrilla warfare in its purest form, isolating its targets, disrupting communication lines, and using the alien technology against them. The Overlords had no idea how to counter a threat that didn't follow their logical frameworks. It exploited the cracks in their seemingly perfect system, turning every advantage into a weakness. The Shadow Assassins, once feared as unstoppable, were now targets themselves. The creeper had not only figured out how to counter their cloaking devices and stealth technology, but it had turned their tactics back on them. The assassins, who had once moved without fear, now hesitated in every mission. Their confidence was shattered, and their fear of the creeper grew with each failed encounter. It was as if the very shadows they once controlled now worked against them. The creeper's attacks were not random, though. They were calculated, always aimed at destabilizing the Overlord's core strategies. Power grids were disrupted, key alien figures disappeared, and critical supply lines were cut off. Every time the Overlords tried to push forward, they were met with setbacks that seemed to come from nowhere. They couldn't predict the creeper's movements, couldn't prepare for its strikes. The battlefield had become a psychological war, and the Overlords were losing. Humanity's morale surged. Seeing their invincible oppressors falter gave them hope. Resistance groups, once scattered and disorganized, began to work together, sharing intelligence and planning coordinated operations. They no longer felt like they were fighting a losing battle. With the creeper carving a path of destruction through the enemy's ranks, humanity found a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just surviving, they were fighting back, and they were winning. But even as victories mounted, there was a growing tension among Earth's survivors. The creeper had become something more than just a symbol of hope. It was also feared, even by those who benefited from its actions. Its methods were brutal, leaving no room for mercy. Some began to question whether the creeper was still fighting for humanity, or if it had become something else entirely, something darker. The creeper's ruthless efficiency raised difficult questions. Could humanity really reclaim its world if the victory came at such a high moral cost? Could they ever return to the way things were before the invasion? The creeper's tactics were necessary, but they came with consequences. The line between humanity and its alien enemies was starting to blur. Was the creeper still human, or had it evolved into something beyond them? Despite these concerns, the creeper's role in the war couldn't be denied. The Overlord's empire was starting to crumble under the weight of its failures. For every new piece of technology they deployed to fight the creeper, another part of their control over Earth slipped away. Their resources were stretched too thin, their assassins too few, and their morale too shattered to hold on to the planet much longer. The Overlords were becoming increasingly desperate. They tried to bring in reinforcements from their other conquered worlds, but those forces were delayed, bogged down by logistical problems and the fear that had now spread across the alien hierarchy. No one wanted to face the creeper. It had become a symbol of inevitable death, an entity that even the most advanced technology couldn't defeat. And so, the Overlords found themselves isolated, trapped on a world they no longer controlled. In a final act of desperation, the Overlords began to escalate their attacks on human cities, hoping to flush the creeper out by threatening the lives of the remaining population. They bombed civilian areas indiscriminately, seeking to force humanity into surrender through sheer terror. But this only fueled the resistance further. The more brutal the Overlords became, the more determined humanity grew to see them destroyed. The Creeper responded in kind. It became even more aggressive, launching a series of coordinated strikes against the Overlords' strongholds. Every time they thought they had cornered the Creeper, it slipped through their grasp, hitting them from an unexpected angle. The Overlords were running out of time and options. They had entered this war believing they would dominate effortlessly, but now they were losing to an enemy they couldn't even understand. And as the conflict reached its boiling point, the Creeper remained in the shadows, a constant reminder that no matter how powerful the invaders thought they were, they could never truly conquer the human spirit. Fear, once used as a weapon against Earth, had been turned on its creators. The Overlords, for all their might, were learning that even the strongest armies could be brought down by the darkness they themselves had unleashed. The Overlords were desperate now. They had underestimated Earth's ability to resist, and more importantly, they had underestimated the Creeper. Every measure they had taken to counter it had failed. The technological superiority they had relied on for centuries had been rendered useless by a foe that wasn't bound by their understanding of warfare. And now, they were beginning to understand that fear, this primal, uncontrollable emotion, was their undoing. In a final bid to regain control, the Overlords unleashed their most dangerous weapons yet. They had held back, saving these tools for a situation they never thought would arise. These weren't just weapons of mass destruction but devices designed to break the will of any enemy. Entire cities were razed overnight, not for strategic advantage, but as a show of force. The message was clear: the Creeper might be winning the battles, but humanity would pay the price in blood. But the Creeper did not respond to threats, and neither did humanity. Each act of brutality only strengthened the resolve of those still fighting. The survivors of these massacres didn't crumble in fear, they fought back harder. The Creeper, still lurking in the shadows, struck more viciously than ever. Its targets were no longer just the shadow assassins, but the Overlords themselves. High-ranking alien commanders, previously untouchable, were suddenly within its reach. The Overlords' leadership began to unravel as their own fell, one after another, to the Creeper's relentless attacks. The Overlords turned inward, their once organized hierarchy descending into chaos. Distrust spread among their ranks as fear took hold. They could no longer trust that their defenses would hold, that their technology would protect them. Paranoia crept into every decision they made. They began to suspect that humanity had discovered something greater than they were letting on, something even more dangerous than the Creeper itself. How else could they explain the relentless destruction of their forces? In their panic, the Overlords began to tear themselves apart. Some factions within their own ranks called for retreat, recognizing that they were losing control. Others, more prideful and desperate, pushed for an even greater escalation, one that could destroy not only the Creeper but all of humanity in one decisive blow. But this division only played into the Creeper's hands. It capitalized on their growing infighting, exploiting the cracks that were widening in their once unshakable command structure. As the alien forces splintered, the Creeper pressed its advantage. It wasn't just about killing key figures anymore. The Creeper began systematically dismantling their communication networks, cutting off their ability to coordinate attacks or rally reinforcements. The Overlords, who had once controlled every corner of the planet with absolute precision, were now blind. They had no way of knowing where the next strike would come from or how to defend against it. Humanity watched from the fringes, taking note of the Overlords' disarray. The resistance fighters saw their chance. With the Overlords divided and weakened, they began to organize larger offensives. This was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming their planet. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity was on the offensive, and the Overlords could do little to stop it. The Creeper's assaults grew bolder. It infiltrated the heart of the Overlords' remaining fortresses, taking down not just soldiers but their very infrastructure. Advanced power systems were sabotaged, weapons caches destroyed, and critical supplies cut off. The Creeper had shifted the balance of the war entirely. The Overlords, once invincible, were now the ones being hunted. Every attempt to flush out the Creeper resulted in catastrophic failure. Their traps failed, their countermeasures backfired, and their most loyal assassins were no match for the growing legend of the Creeper. By now, The creeper was no longer a mere weapon of war, it had become a symbol, an embodiment of Earth's vengeance. The remaining overlords were terrified. They had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now they were trapped on a world they couldn't control, haunted by a nightmare they had unleashed. They were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. As their situation grew more dire, the overlords made one final push. They deployed their most advanced weaponry, tools that could tear through cities in seconds and devastate entire populations. This was their last resort, a gamble that, if successful, would leave nothing behind. But the creeper was ready. It had anticipated this move, and it struck before they could execute their plan. In a series of coordinated attacks, the creeper sabotaged their key weapon systems, rendering their last hope of victory useless. The overlords had lost. Their armies were in disarray, their assassins were either dead or too afraid to act, and their leadership was fractured beyond repair. The creeper had not only broken their bodies but their spirit. They had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had doomed themselves. Now, faced with the reality of their defeat, the overlords had no choice but to retreat. What few forces they had left were evacuated, and their ships, once symbols of fear and power, fled into the sky, abandoning Earth to the creeper and its people. Humanity had won, but not through brute force or superior technology. They had won by turning the very weapon the overlords had used against them, fear, back on their invaders. The battle for Earth was over, but the war had left its mark. Cities lay in ruins, millions had perished, and the world would never be the same. Yet, in their victory, humanity had reclaimed not just their planet, but their future. The creeper had done what no army could, it had broken the overlords and shown the universe that humanity was not to be underestimated. But even as the last of the overlords fled, the question of the creeper's future remained. It had served its purpose, but its methods had been brutal, unforgiving. The creeper was more than a weapon now, it was a force of nature. Would it fade into history, or would it continue to shape the new world that was emerging from the ashes of war? For now, the answer didn't matter. Earth had survived, and the creeper had ensured that it would never be threatened in the same way again. The overlords had been sent running, their armies decimated, their pride shattered. And in the end, it was humanity, adaptable, relentless, and unbreakable, that had sent them packing. The creeper was both their savior and their reminder of what it took to survive. With the overlords gone and their forces in retreat, the world was left in an eerie silence. The once mighty alien ships had fled, their shadow assassins destroyed or in hiding. The skies that had been filled with their imposing presence were now empty. Humanity had won, but the cost was staggering. Cities lay in ruin, vast stretches of land were uninhabitable, and the survivors were few. Amidst the rubble and desolation, people began to emerge, trying to make sense of the new world they now inhabited. The creeper, the mysterious force that had turned the tide of the war, had vanished as swiftly as it had appeared. It had fulfilled its purpose, striking fear into the heart of the invaders and dismantling their empire from within. But no one knew what had become of it. There were whispers, of course, rumors that it had returned to the shadows, waiting, watching, ensuring that no other force would ever again threaten Earth. Others believed that the creeper had been a manifestation of humanity's darkest instincts, a reflection of what people were capable of when pushed to the brink of extinction. For the survivors, the real challenge had only just begun. Rebuilding the world wasn't just about clearing the debris or restoring the infrastructure. The psychological scars ran deeper than the physical damage. The war had reshaped humanity, and there was no going back to what had once been. People had witnessed the collapse of everything they knew, and in its place, they had seen the rise of something far more primal. The creeper had shown them that survival required a willingness to embrace the darkness within, to fight with everything, no matter the cost. But that same darkness now lingered. The creeper had been a weapon of necessity, a savior in humanity's darkest hour. Yet, for many, it had also become a symbol of fear. There was a growing unease among the survivors. What would happen if the creeper turned its gaze back on them? Could they trust that it would remain dormant, or had they unleashed something that could never be fully controlled? These questions haunted those who had lived through the war. The resistance fighters, once unified by the common enemy, now faced a different kind of division. Some saw the Creeper as a hero, a necessary force that had done what no army could. They believed it had saved humanity, and whatever methods it had used were justified. Others, however, viewed it with suspicion, fearing that the Creeper's ruthlessness reflected a darker future. The line between humanity and its enemies had blurred, and now, with no invaders left to fight, that line was becoming harder to define. Amid the rebuilding efforts, debates raged on about the future of Earth's defense. Some called for the development of new technologies to prevent another invasion, advocating for greater control and vigilance. They saw the Creeper as a last resort, something that should never be relied upon again. Others argued that the Creeper represented the ultimate defense, a reminder that Earth could fight back in ways no one had anticipated, and that this advantage should be cultivated. But the Creeper's true nature remained a mystery. There were no records of its origins, no official reports detailing who, or what, it truly was. Those who had been closest to the resistance leadership knew of the secret experiments, the psychological warfare tactics that had been developed long before the invasion. Yet even they couldn't fully explain how the Creeper had evolved into the force that had ultimately driven the Overlords from Earth. The question of control loomed large. Had humanity created the Creeper, or had the Creeper created itself from the fear and desperation of a planet on the brink of destruction? In the aftermath of the war, this question became the focal point of intense speculation. Some believed the Creeper was still among them, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment it would be needed again. Others hoped that it had disappeared for good, a relic of a time when survival demanded the most extreme measures. For now, though, the world turned its attention to rebuilding. Nations, once decimated by the invasion, slowly began to re-establish themselves. Governments were reformed, though many with different ideologies than before. The old ways of thinking, about power, control, and governance, had been shattered by the war. In their place emerged a new understanding of what it meant to survive, to fight for the future. It was no longer just about domination or strength, it was about adaptability, resilience, and the willingness to face the unknown. The Creeper had been all of those things. It had adapted, evolved, and turned the Overlords' own tactics against them. But in doing so, it had forced humanity to confront its own capacity for darkness. The victory had come at a price, not just in lives, but in the way humanity now viewed itself. The Creeper had shown them that they were capable of anything when faced with extinction, but it had also left them questioning what that meant for their future. As the world slowly healed, the legend of the Creeper became a part of the new narrative. Stories of its deeds, its victories, and its mysterious disappearances spread across the globe. For some, it was a tale of triumph, a reminder of humanity's strength in the face of impossible odds. For others, it was a cautionary story about the dangers of embracing fear and darkness as weapons. Yet, despite all the uncertainty, one thing was clear: the Creeper had changed the world forever. The Overlords had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they had left defeated, broken by a force they could never have anticipated. And while the Overlords' empire had crumbled, the Creeper's shadow remained, a silent guardian, or a silent threat, watching over a world that was now rebuilding from the ashes. For now, the Creeper had disappeared. But whether it was waiting for the next threat, or simply fading into myth, no one could say for sure. It had been Earth's last, greatest weapon, and it had proven that humanity, no matter the odds, would always find a way to survive.